Hey y'all, this is Dooster with Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I got a little story I want to share with you today, and if you will bear with me, my throat's kind of raw and a little scratchy today, so I'm going to try my best to get through this. I run upon this story when I was doing research for one of my early books, Execution of Murder, which chronicles the early murders of Robertson County, Tennessee, 1810 through 1910. It's also featured in one of my other books, Trials and Tribulations. All my books are available on Amazon. You can order them there. You can also shoot me an email if you want a signed autographed copy. Shoot me an email to ghosthunter911@gmail.com. As once again, that is ghosthunter911@gmail.com. You can also visit my Facebook page, Soggy Bottom Creations Bookstore, and they kind of give you a brief overview of each one of the books. But if you do want a signed copy or whatever, shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get it. I call this story An Eye for an Eye. Like I said, it is a true story. The year was 1810. Elisha Gardner sat on the cool dirt floor of the jail with his back against a rough log wall. The sun had just broken the horizon, and its bright rays penetrated through the unchinked cracks between the logs, illuminating the bleak interior of his prison. This is back in the early days of Robertson County, before we had any kind of a masonry or a stone jail. This was just a simple log structure thrown up just to kind of keep the prisoners locked up until they could do better. Elisha was not alone, for 3 others were also held captive here, each with his wrist chained to the wall. He was not like the others. The others were criminals, serving time for various crimes. Elisha was not a criminal. He was just a simple debtor. He was sentenced by the court to be incarcerated until his debt was paid off. He was allowed to work outside the jail during the daytime, earning 7 1/2 cents per day. And all that money was to be paid toward his debt. At this rate, he would be in jail for the rest of his life over a $20 debt. He had fallen on the hard times, and his farm had been sold for taxes by the sheriff some years ago. Now he had no way to pay his other debts, and so he ended up in debtor's prison. Okay, shortly after dawn, the jailer walked into the jail and unlocked the chain from around his wrist. As he led him to the door, the jailer harshly spoke. "You know the rules, Gardner. Stay in the bounds. Don't cause any trouble, and make sure you to be back here before dark." Gardner knew the rules by heart, for he had heard them repeated many times. As he walked past the courthouse, a plan began to form in his mind. All he had to do was simply walk out of town and disappear. He could hide by day, travel by night. He had relatives in nearby Montgomery County, and if he made it there, he could stay with them for a while. He would work, pay his debts off, and once again be a free man. Maybe he could even buy his farm back, or at least it sounded like a plan at the time. Carefully and deliberately, he worked his way through the dense woods on the north side of town, and as he waded across Sulphur Fork Creek, he knew he had gone too far to turn back. He had broken the first rule. He was out of the town limits. He was now a fugitive from justice, and he knew the sheriff would come looking for him. He was now in a thinly populated area, and was fairly certain no one had seen him. Finding a deep valley in the forest, he settled down in a pile of leaves and took a long nap. When he awoke, it was already dark, and the third rule was also history. Knowing he would be whipped at the whipping post if caught, He quickly made his way northwest, crossing numerous small streams of water and keeping to the woods when possible. The moon was full, so he had no problem navigating his way through the hills and hollows of the rugged terrain. After 4 nights of traveling, Gardner finally reached his destination, but his freedom was to be short-lived. Meanwhile, back in Springfield, Sheriff John B. Cheatham had been looking for Gardner since his escape. Word around Springfield was that Gardner had relatives in Clarksville, and that's probably where he was hiding out. Word was sent to Clarksville to be on the lookout for Gardner. Gardner was quickly located and arrested by the Montgomery County Sheriff. Once again, Gardner found himself a prisoner and now faced additional charges of escape. When word reached Springfield that Gardner had been apprehended, Sheriff Cheatham sent Stuart Thornton and Jacob Pickering to Clarksville to return Gardner to Springfield. At the time, Pickering was a local tavern owner and a constable of Springfield. Thornton was Springfield's only tailor and also served as a custodian of the Robertson County Courthouse. On horseback, Pickering and Thornton rode to Clarksville, and once there, they retrieved their prisoner. After doing so, they stopped off at a tavern for a few minutes and indulged themselves with some hard liquor, leaving their prisoner outside, tied to the hitching post. A few minutes later it became an hour, and by that time they had become quite intoxicated. Pickering purchased a bottle for the road, untied Gardner, and they headed toward Springfield. At first, Gardner rode piggyback behind Thornton. Then, to give the horse a rest, he rode behind Pickering. As they rode, they continued to pass the bottle back and forth, and soon both were drunk beyond reason. Just before reaching the Robertson County line near Port Royal, they again stopped to rest the horses and let them drink some fresh water. Pickering and Thornton were so drunk that they were barely able to sit in the saddle. Gardner laughed at the drunken men, which thoroughly enraged them. They then gave him an unmerciful beating with his wrist still tied. It was then decided to make Gardner walk the remainder of the way as a further punishment. Besides, neither one of the men wanted to be seen riding with a prisoner. Gardner's hands were tied to his side, and a rope was thrown around his neck, with the other end tied to Pickering's saddle horn. They started off at a slow pace at first, then got faster. Gardner, surprisingly, was able to keep his footing, for he knew his life depended on it. Soon the horse was in a dead run, with Gardner trying his best to keep up. Unable to keep his balance, Gardner tripped and fell, the rope strangling him and the rocky road tearing his flesh to shreds. He was dragged along down the road, his body twisting and turning, being dragged first on his back, then on his stomach, and then on his side. His death quickly followed. Just before reaching Walnut Grove outside Adams Station, they again stopped to rest and water the horses. Both men dismounted and sat down against a tree to rest. Soon both were passed out, and it was almost dark when they awoke. It was only then that they realized what they had done. Throwing Gardner's bloody, shredded body across the back of Thornton's horse, they took their time delivering the body to Springfield, using the time to invent an excuse to try to explain what happened. But there was no excuse. They had murdered, plain and simple. It was only then the one thing to do: deliver Gardner's body to the sheriff and face the consequences. Arriving in Springfield, they delivered the body of Gardner to the sheriff, and upon hearing what happened, Sheriff Cheatham immediately arrested Pickering and Thornton on a charge of first-degree murder. Gardner's body was turned over to his family, and a pauper coffin was supplied by the county for his burial. And as to this date, his burial site is presently unknown. We haven't found that yet. Since the murder actually occurred in Montgomery County, Pickering and Thornton were turned over to the officials there. Both were indicted by the Montgomery County grand jury for murder in the first degree. A change of venue in the case was granted, with Thornton and Pickering being moved to Nashville. On Friday, September 14th, 1810, Thornton had his day in court, being represented by Nashville attorney O.B. Hayes. The trial was a short one, for on that same day the jury returned a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. He was sentenced by Judge Thomas Stewart to death by hanging. The following day, Pickering's trial started. His attorney was Washington L. Hannum. Pickering's trial was equally short, and before nightfall he had been found guilty as well. He was also sentenced to die at the gallows. Both Pickering and Thornton filed motions for a new trial, but their motions were overruled by the Supreme Court. Both appealed, but their sentence was affirmed by the higher court. On Saturday, July 13, 1811, before a large crowd, Pickering and Thornton were hanged by Davidson County Sheriff Michael Dunn. The execution took place a short distance from the courthouse. After confirming that their lives had expired, Pickering and Thornton were cut down and their bodies loaded into a wagon and hauled back to Springfield for burial. And this was to be the first recorded hanging of any citizen of Robertson County, Tennessee. And like Elisha's grave, their burial locations are unknown at this time. And that was my story on An Eye for an Eye. I hope you enjoyed it. If you don't mind, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. And I'm going to be sharing a few more stories like this as I go along, and as my throat will let me. So, like I said, y'all be careful, be safe out there. Have a good day, and we will catch you later.